How Savannah Chrisley broke Nic Kerdiles' death to Todd. Savannah Chrisley shared the news that Nic Kerdiles passed away to her dad, Todd Chrisley, at the Pensacola prison. Although they were no longer engaged before his death, the family loved him dearly. Describing that terrible day, the Chrisley Knows Best alum bared her heart, and it seemed to be devastating. Savannah Chrisley took the news about Nic very emotionally. Chase Chrisley and Nic were friends, and Savannah fell in love with him. About 5 years ago, Chrisley Knows Best fans thought that the relationship might not last. After all, Todd became so involved in their future wedding plans that viewers mocked him. Many people thought it was doomed to fail. However, things remained friendly between the different parties involved. Nic Kerdiles passed away in September 2023 at the age of just 29. The fatal bike accident news brought reactions from the family, including Todd and Julie Chrisley. Now people know that Todd found out via his daughter, and in a podcast she opened up about what went down. Additionally, she mentioned that Julie thought of Nic as a son, and she felt sad for his real parents. Actually, viewers thought it was painful to watch as Savannah took Nic's death very emotionally, telling Todd Chrisley about the death of Nic Kerdiles. On her Unlocked podcast, Todd's daughter has been reading letters from her mom in prison. In the most recent episode, on March 26, she read out a letter that Julie wrote after she heard that Nic Kerdiles had passed away. That made the former reality TV star very sad. Talking about that day, Todd Chrisley's daughter described how awful it was telling him about the passing of her former fiance. Savannah Chrisley was tearful as she related her tale, and it turned out that she was just about to visit her dad when the news arrived. She added, realizing something was wrong, Todd Chrisley naturally asked her what was up, and all she could say was Nic. The Chrisley Knows Best star elaborated on how hard it was telling him that. However, she also said, I'm also so grateful that God allowed me to be the one to tell him so he didn't have to be alone when he heard the news. Savannah Chrisley started to talk about Nic Kerdiles at the 25:40 mark in the video below. What are your thoughts about Savannah Chrisley hearing about the death of Nic Kerdiles on the plane, which she went to visit Todd Chrisley in prison? The soft hum of the early morning filtered through the curtains of Todd Chrisley's temporary home, where he'd been staying since his legal troubles took him from the luxurious life he once knew. The warmth of the sunlight was deceptive. The weight of a stormy revelation hung in the air. Savannah Chrisley, poised but trembling, sat in the car parked just outside, gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled hands. Today, she faced one of the hardest tasks of her life, breaking the devastating news of Nic Kerdiles' death to her father. Savannah had been Nic's fiance once, sharing a love that was tumultuous but deeply genuine. Though they had parted ways romantically, their bond remained unbreakable. When the news of Nic's tragic death had come to her like a thunderclap in the night, it wasn't just her grief that overwhelmed her. It was the responsibility of telling her family, especially Todd, who had grown to love Nic like a son. The drive to see Todd felt like an eternity. Savannah replayed every moment in her head, every word she practiced in the mirror. How do you tell someone that a vibrant soul has been extinguished? She clutched her phone tightly, reading the message from her mother, Julie, who was equally heartbroken but urged Savannah to be the one to deliver the news. You're the strongest one, Savannah, Julie had said through tears on their late-night call. He'll need you to be gentle but honest. Savannah pulled into the driveway, her heart pounding like a drum. She took a deep breath, stepped out of the car, and walked toward the door. Todd's morning routine. Inside, Todd was humming a tune from his childhood, something calming that reminded him of simpler days. He was seated in the sunroom, sipping his morning coffee and going over the day's reading. When he saw Savannah step into the room, he knew immediately that something was wrong. Her eyes, usually full of spark and mischief, were dim and clouded. Her posture, always confident and self-assured, seemed hesitant. "Savannah, sweetheart, what's going on?" Todd asked, setting down his mug and rising to his feet. She stood there for a moment, frozen. The words she had rehearsed refused to come. Instead, tears welled up in her eyes. "Daddy," she said, her voice cracking. "I need to tell you something. It's about Nic." Todd's expression shifted, concern knitting his brows together. What happened to Nic? The breaking point. Savannah stepped closer, reaching out to hold her father's hands. "Daddy," she whispered, "Nic passed away last night." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Todd stared at her, uncomprehending. "What are you talking about, Savannah? What do you mean he passed away?" She squeezed his hands, her tears now flowing freely. "There was an accident, Dad. He's gone." For a moment, Todd said nothing. His face, usually so expressive, was blank. Then, as the weight of her words sank in, his legs gave out, and he collapsed back into his chair. No, this can't be true. Not Nic. Savannah knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around his trembling form. "I'm so sorry, Daddy. I'm so sorry." Memories flooded and Todd sat in stunned silence as memories of Nic flooded his mind. The young man who had walked into their lives with a disarming smile and an honest charm. Nic had been more than Savannah's boyfriend. He had been family. Todd remembered the afternoons spent on the golf course, the endless conversations about life and faith, and the way Nic had always treated Savannah with respect, even after their romantic relationship ended. "He was just here," Todd whispered, his voice cracking. "We were talking about him coming by for dinner next week. He promised me he'd bring dessert." Savannah nodded, wiping her tears. "I know, Dad, I know. It doesn't seem real." The aftermath. The rest of the morning passed in a haze. Todd alternated between periods of quiet reflection and sudden bursts of grief. Savannah stayed by his side, offering whatever comfort she could. She knew that her father, for all his bravado and sharp wit, had a tender heart that felt lost deeply. At one point, Todd looked at her and said, "How are you holding up, sweetheart? You loved him too." Savannah hesitated, then said, "I'm heartbroken, Dad. But right now, I just want to make sure you're okay." He reached out and took her hand. "We'll get through this together. That's what family does." A tribute to Nic. Later that day, the Chrisley family gathered in their living room to remember Nic. They shared stories about his kindness, his humor, and his unwavering loyalty. Todd, despite his pain, found the strength to say a few words. Nic wasn't just a part of Savannah's life, Todd began, his voice trembling. He was a part of all our lives. He had a way of making everyone feel special, like they mattered. And I'll carry that with me for the rest of my life. Savannah, sitting beside him, added, "Nic taught me so much about love and forgiveness. Even though we weren't together anymore, he never stopped being there for me. He was one of the best men I've ever known." Healing together. In the days that followed, the Chrisley family leaned on each other for support. Savannah took on the role of caretaker, ensuring that everyone, especially Todd, had the space to grieve. She also reached out to Nic's family, offering her condolences and sharing memories of the man they all loved. Through it all, Savannah found strength she didn't know she had. Breaking the news to Todd had been the hardest thing she'd ever done, but it had also reminded her of the resilience of her family. They had weathered storms before, and though this one felt particularly cruel, they would face it together. As Savannah sat on the porch one evening, looking out at the setting sun, she whispered a quiet prayer for Nic. "Thank you for everything," she said. "You'll always be a part of us." And in her heart, she felt a sense of peace, knowing that love, no matter how brief or complicated, was the greatest gift of all.